Hi, I'm Beth, creator of dryitcanit.com, and I have this channel so that I can share tips, tricks, and how-tos, as well as original recipes for dehydrating foods and canning foods. Today I want to do an experiment, an unofficially, not scientific experiment, but one nonetheless. I often read online questions about what's the best way to store dehydrated foods. Well, hands down, the best way is going to be to condition it and then store it in a moisture-proof container. What is a moisture-proof container? It kind of got me thinking. Now, I usually store mine in either Mylar bags or in jars, but that's a personal preference. If it's for short term, like you're going on a camping trip for the weekend or something, then probably regular Ziploc bags are just fine. But then I started thinking about, well, what really does work? So I've gathered some materials and I'm going to do an experiment. I have a bowl of water and I'm going to add some red food dye to that. And then I've gathered some different storage materials. I have a glass jar with a lid that has no internal plastic gasket built in. I have a plastic jar, an old mayonnaise jar. I prefer buying glass because I can recycle it easier, but that's not always available. But does plastic work? I have a brand name Ziploc bag. Ziploc bags are handy for lots of things. I have a Mylar bag that I actually use for many of the dry goods that I have. I have a generic store brand name Ziploc bag, which is a little bit thinner than the Ziploc bag. And then I have a good quality vacuum sealing bag. So what I'm going to do for this experiment is I'm going to first of all take my water and I'm going to add a drop or two of red food coloring. I want this to be fairly red because I want it to show up. I also don't want to get my fingers red, so put a few more drops in there and kind of let that go and do its thing. Now, to that, what I'm going to do is I've gathered some rocks, which I'm going to use as weights, so to speak, and then I'm going to put my various containers in here and I'm going to let them soak. Maybe it's going to be for a day or so, maybe it's going to be more, maybe it's going to be less. So I'm going to start with my biggest container, which is going to have a lot of air in it, so I have a heavier rock. And in this particular case, I'm going to take my rock and I'm going to wrap it. And I did get food coloring on me. Hang on, I have to get that off. I'm going to take this rock and I'm going to place it in the jar, like so. And then I'm going to put the lid on, and I don't really want to drop this in the jar because I don't want to crack it. But this rock will kind of hold it down. So I'm going to put that down like so, and then we'll see if that jar leaks water. Now obviously your stored foods aren't in water, but this is a good indication as to whether or not moisture is getting in. Then I'm going to take my glass jar. This one's pretty small, so I'm going to take a small paper towel. I'm going to put a rock in there. Maybe I'll put 2 rocks in there. And then I'm going to fold my paper towel and stuff that in there like so. And I'm going to put the cover on again tight, and I'm going to put that in the container upside down. If water gets in these containers upside down, it's going to get in the container storing long term, which is why I'm doing it this way. I'll take my generic Ziploc bag. I'll put a paper towel in there, and again I'll put a couple rocks in there just so that this doesn't float. And I'm going to put this in here, but I'm not going to put the Ziploc top in there. Logically, that is part of a moisture area, and it is part of where a moisture could get through, but because I'm submerging it in water, I'm going to try and just put that like so. Leave the Ziploc part of it up. Then I have a generic large Ziploc bag, and again, I'm going to put just a couple rocks in there. I really don't want much air in there because that'll cause it to float. And I'm going to put a paper towel down at the bottom of it. I'm going to squeeze the air out as best I can. And I'm going to put that in there. Might have to weight that down with something else, but at least I've got the corner in. I've got to put another rock or 2 in there because this one's floating. If you ever go outside and want rocks and then you can't find them, this is a good example. Seems like you always have rocks in your yard until you want them, right? All right, so there's something in there. All right, then I have my decent quality bag that I use for vacuum sealing. And again, I'm going to put a paper towel in there, like so at the bottom. I'm not going to actually vacuum seal this. because I don't think that's necessary for this particular experiment. I'm going to push that paper towel down to the bottom. And again, I'm going to put a couple rocks in there. And then I'm going to stick it in the water so that the bottom is submerged. I'm having trouble with this big one staying submerged. And then last but not least, I'm going to take my Mylar bag. Now Mylar bags are interesting because they come zipped here with a tear, but the bottom of them is actually unsealed, and that's what you're going to use to seal when you put your food in there. Mylar bags are nice because if you are in fact going camping or something, you can take these and you can actually add water to them and cook your meal in them. But for purposes of this test, I'm going to go ahead and put this down on the Ziploc steel, put my last couple rocks in there, and I'm going to submerge this bag. So my jar, my little glass jar just fell over, but I think that's okay. So I have now all of my bags in here submerged, and I'm going to leave this for a couple of days, and I'm going to see what happens. So stay tuned and I'll show you the results. Our little experiment now has sat for 2 full days, and I have what to me is some surprising results. So what I'm going to do is take this water that has red food coloring in it, and I'm going to dump this, and I'm going to rinse off the outside of these bags because frankly I don't want to get food coloring on my fingers or on my counter. So stay tuned and I'll be right back with the results. I've rinsed off the bags and got rid of the red food coloring. Now this was an interesting experiment, and I certainly had some expectations about how it was going to go, and it didn't go quite as I expected. So I'm just going to pull these out and show you what we have. Just a reminder, so I took various components that store food, and I put some paper towels in them, I put some rocks in them just to weight them down into a bowl of red colored water, food coloring into the water. So starting with the Mylar bag, which is used often for food storage, when I reach in and pull this out, my paper towel is absolutely dry. I have no food coloring on it, and I had this with the Ziploc sealed down, but it hadn't been opened yet. I expected this to do that because these bags are high quality bags. They're really good for long-term storage, and not only do they keep the moisture out, but they also keep the sunlight out, so they're really excellent for storage. And the ones that I use, I actually get online, and I'll put a link to these in case you're interested. They're good for things that don't have sharp edges though, because you don't want something to poke through these because then you're going to get air in them. But these are great for brown sugar packages. I just put in here, I don't vacuum seal them, and it keeps the brown sugar soft forever. But I diverge, I don't want to go down that line right now. So this was a good quality vacuum seal bag that I expected to do really well. And when I pull out this paper towel, it also is absolutely dry with no food coloring, no moisture whatsoever. Don't know if I should use this bag again since I had some rocks from outside in it, but that was a really good alternative. Some foods you can vacuum seal, some of them you just want to seal. Good option for storing your dehydrated food. This one was a bit of a surprise to me. This was a plastic jar. This was a mayonnaise jar in this particular case, and I had it plenty tight. I double checked that. This, you can see, has pink food coloring in it and is wet, and in fact even has moisture droplets on the jar. Interestingly enough, while I expected this might leak, this leaked within 5 minutes of the experiment. So I think absolutely do not use plastic containers that have lids without any kind of a seal in here. This is absolutely a no-no in my opinion. This one was a little bit of a surprise. This was a glass jar, and this also had a lid without any kind of a seal on it. This I thought would work, but as you can see, it did pick up moisture and it did pick up some of the food coloring. So again, the glass jars with a cover, but no plastic lid inside, and I'll show you what I mean by that in a bit. No good. I don't think that works. So my lesson here is plastic or glass with lids with nothing to keep that moisture out are not necessarily good. I think either one of these might be good for short term, but I don't think that they're good for long term. Here were my 2 surprises. This was just a plain old Ziploc brand store name plastic bag. Now, two things with this. When I had this in there, this was absolutely dry with no leakage, and that really, really surprised me. And then last night, I actually turned it upside down and put it in the water so that the zip, the seal, was into the water. And I did get a little bit of leakage and red coloring from that. But in terms of the zip not being in the water, this did much better than I thought it would. So I think that a plain plastic bag will work fine for short-term storage. What do I mean by short-term storage? I think if you have food that is not high in sugar content, such as fruit, I think you can store them in a plastic Ziploc generic bag for a couple of months with no problem. I wouldn't store dehydrated meat in it simply because that's more open to spoilage. But I wouldn't have any problem with vegetables being stored in here or powders being stored in here. So this was a surprise. This was an Essential brand, which I think is available at probably Target and Walmart. But this was a nice surprise for me. So short term, again, it's fine. Be careful with sharp edges. So if I have something like dehydrated onion pieces or dehydrated peppers, which sometimes have sharp edges, easily could puncture and put holes in the bag. You don't want that to happen because then you're going to get air and moisture in here. But because it did leak through the Ziploc part of it, Ziploc is a brand name, I don't know if I should use that, but because it did leak through that, I wouldn't store anything in here probably more than 3 or 4 months. And I got the same result with the brand name bag, which is a higher quality bag. You definitely can feel the difference in the plastic. I also expected it to leak though because it was plastic and it was as dry as could be. I did not test the zip on this, which does have a double zip and it might be fine. I think you could probably store something, again, maybe not fruits, or something in high sugar content, but I think you could store something in here for 3 to 4 months because the plastic is a little bit thicker and it would be fine. So it was an interesting experiment. I wish I would have done some jars with some lids with the gasket. So this is an old salsa lid, and if you can see what you have here, what we have is a little bit of a pink edge from the salsa, the tomato. Hopefully you can see that. I think when you have jar lids that have this rubber gasket on it, you're probably better off storing with those than you are definitely with these, which I think are a fail. I think that these would be good though for your fruits, etc. And I'm a big proponent of taking your jars that you buy your product in and reusing them rather than using your canning jars when you can. If I'm storing long term, if I'm storing for 6 months to a year, I probably am still going to use my canning jars for any fruit or vegetable or meat that might be expensive, simply because it's going to give me better long-term storage. Now, in terms of dehydrated food, how long you're going to store it is really going to depend on how well you dried it and how well you conditioned it. Generally, if you have it properly sealed and you have no moisture, your dehydrated food is generally going to stay safe for easily 6 months to a year. The exception is going to be dehydrated meats. Dehydrated meats should not be stored on your pantries more than 1 to 2 months, simply because they have fats in them and they're more likely to spoil. But you can take dehydrated meats, chicken, beef, whatever, turkey is another one, fish. You can dehydrate those and store them in your freezer long term. And I will be doing a dehydrated meat sometime this fall. So anyway, this was an interesting experiment. And again, I think the lesson is don't store in plastic jars for sure. Don't store in glass jars unless you have some kind of a gasket on your lid. Ziploc bags or plastic bags or Mylar bags, short-term storage up to a couple of months, I think it works. So I hope you found this helpful. If you learned something, I would appreciate a thumbs up because then I know that this is the kind of video that you like. Please consider subscribing to the channel. I generally post on Mondays and Thursdays. If you don't like that particular topic, you can go buy it, but you get notified of all my recipes and my how-tos. So stay tuned for lots more information. I thank you for watching. Happy canning, happy dehydrating.